Good morning, everybody. My name is John O'Connor. I'm a pre-sales technical specialist for Spectrum Protect PLUS. We are going to go through this deck to try to give you guys a better understanding from a technical perspective of how Spectrum Protect PLUS works, its architecture, its connection to Spectrum Protect, and other features and functions that you'll need to know about. So we're going to go through, as I mentioned, just a basic overview of Spectrum Protect PLUS, its architecture and system requirements. We're going to go through the various components of Spectrum Protect PLUS, which is the Spectrum Protect PLUS server, the VADP proxy, and the VSNAP storage server. We're going to talk about the various users and permissions that you can create within Spectrum Protect PLUS to allow you to leverage the role-based access control to distribute the management and functionality of the application. We're going to talk about the connection to LDAP for users and the SMTP environment so that you can email and send reports out. We're going to talk about SLAs, which are service level agreements, to talk about the RPO and RTO requirements and how you translate that into policies within Spectrum Protect PLUS. We're going to talk about the backup options that you have for both VMware and Hyper-V backups. We're going to talk about the file metadata indexing, right? The ability to capture all of the files on the virtual machines that you are protecting in order to recover those files individually across your entire environment. We're going to talk about the recovery of both VMware and Hyper-V virtual machines and VMDKs. We're going to talk about the file level recoveries that you can do if you have enabled that file metadata indexing. We're going to spend some time and talk about the offload to Spectrum Protect, right? The ability to integrate Spectrum Protect PLUS with Spectrum Protect. We're going to talk about the various maintenance tasks that you have the ability to run within Spectrum Protect PLUS to ensure a healthy environment. And then as well as finally just some reporting options that you have to obviously output information from your Spectrum Protect PLUS environment. So, just a little bit of background. Spectrum Protect PLUS was pre-announced at the end of August, and then was shown at both VMworld in Las Vegas here in the United States, as well as the VMworld in Barcelona in Europe. The primary use cases that we're going to talk a little bit about here are data protection for virtual machines and applications, as well as disaster recovery, and the reuse of the data that you've captured for a variety of different purposes. There are some key design principles that went into the development of Spectrum Protect PLUS. The idea was the ability to, download the application, right, the OVA or the VHD file, and install it and have it protecting your environment in under 30 minutes, right? So very easy to obtain, deploy, and use, right? And that gives you an immediate ROI, right? Start generating benefits as quickly as possible. The rapid protection and recovery of the virtual environment, again, both VMware and Hyper-V, right, giving you the ability to have the lowest RPO and RTO in terms of protection and recovery of that virtual environment. The ability to take application-aware snapshots of your virtual environment, right? And we have a wide DB and application support that will continue to grow over time. Support for both physical and virtual storage. It's a software-defined infrastructure, right, which means obviously that it's very scalable and allows you to add storage, compute, all of these various resources individually over time. Right? It integrates into Spectrum Protect, giving you the capability of long-term retention and archiving out on cloud object storage, tape, a variety of disk mediums, obviously. It is all self-driven and self-service, right? That role-based access control that we're going to talk about gives the backup administrator the ability to allow application owners, such as the VM admins, the ability to perform the tasks necessary to manage their own environment, right, without having to involve the backup admin, the storage admin, etc. And then task automation, right? It is the ability to schedule tasks to be run within the system automatically, reducing the need for people to log in and do things, right? Reducing that manual overhead. So what does the architecture look like? The architecture is pretty straightforward. Right on the left-hand side here, you've got your virtual environment. You have both VMware and Hyper-V environments that are supported by Spectrum Protect PLUS. In the center there, you see the Spectrum Protect PLUS platform, right? This is the Spectrum Protect PLUS server, which has the policies and the catalog and the interface, essentially, that you're going to use to interact from a protection and recovery perspective with your virtual environment. And then you've got on the right-hand side, you've got the storage, where the data is being written to. And at the top, you see the VSNAP storage server, which is the storage repository that is a part of the Spectrum Protect PLUS application, as well as the ability to tier or integrate into the Spectrum Protect environment for that long-term archiving. You can recover data from either location, right, from either the VSNAP storage appliance, the Spectrum Protect PLUS VSNAP storage appliance, or the Spectrum Protect PLUS environment, and all of that is managed through the Spectrum Protect PLUS UI, right? Any jobs that we offload out to Spectrum Protect PLUS are written to the Spectrum Protect PLUS database, and so if you need to recover that data, you can do so through that Spectrum Protect PLUS interface. There's no need for, to log back into your Spectrum Protect environment or anything like that, right? When you perform that recovery, it is an instant recovery. You have access to the data, in under 30 seconds, right, regardless of the size of the data you're looking to recover, and that's because we are virtually mounting that data out of the Spectrum Protect VSNAP storage appliance back to either the original virtual environment that it came from or a different virtual environment, right, a DR site or something like that. And that recovery can be used for many different purposes, right? You've got all kinds of different use cases that you can leverage the data for, and that will essentially drive the type of restore that you're doing, right, as the use case that you have for that particular recovery operation. So as I mentioned, there are actually 3 separate components to the Spectrum Protect PLUS environment, right? You have the Spectrum Protect PLUS server itself, which is the master software. It's the UI, the scheduler, the catalog engine. It is deployed typically once in an environment regardless of the size of that environment. You have VADP proxies, right? The VADP proxies help to shift some of the workload off of the Spectrum Protect PLUS server and distribute that. And you can have as many VADP proxies as you need in your environment. That can be driven by sites, right, where the virtual environments are located within the overview of the organization. It could be driven by performance, right? You may just want to distribute more VADP proxies into the environment to improve the overall performance and workload of the Spectrum Protect PLUS server itself. Finally, you have the VSNAP storage repository, right? That is where Spectrum Protect PLUS is going to write the data that it is capturing from your virtual environments, right? You can have a single VSNAP storage appliance or multiple VSNAP storage appliances, depending, again, on the size of the environment that you're looking to protect using Spectrum Protect PLUS and the distribution of those virtual machines across multiple sites. So you always have at least one VSNAP storage appliance, but can have multiple, again, based on performance and distribution of the virtual machines environments. All 3 of these components can be installed as a single virtual appliance, which is what is going to happen initially in an environment, right? They're going to download the Spectrum Protect PLUS OVA or DHC and install it, and it's going to contain all 3 of these components. However, over the course of time, you can add additional VSNAP storage appliances or VADP proxies as you need them, and each of those can be an individual installation. There's no need to install the Spectrum Protect PLUS total environment again. Right, so some system requirements to keep in mind with the Spectrum Protect PLUS server. It is, there aren't that many requirements here. It's pretty standard, but you do need a VMware or a Hyper-V environment in which to install it. If you are going to install it in a VMware environment, that VMware environment must be vSphere 5.5, 6.0, or 6.5. If you want to install it in a Hyper-V environment, you do need Hyper-V 2016, and the reason for that is that we need to take advantage of the RCT, or change block tracking, essentially equivalent in Hyper-V, and that is only available in the 2016. So we do need to deploy the Spectrum Protect Plus environment in a Hyper-V 2016 environment. From a memory perspective and a CPU perspective, you want to make sure that the Spectrum Protect Plus virtual machine is a 64-bit dual-core machine with at least 16 gigs of memory. And as I mentioned, the initial deployment of the Spectrum Protect Plus appliance is going to include the VSNAP storage appliance. And so you can see there in the bottom left-hand corner some information around the disk sizing that is going to be required for the Spectrum Protect Plus appliance in total. You basically need at least 400 gigs of storage, right? As I said, over time, if you need to increase the size of your VSNAP storage appliance or add additional VSNAP storage pools, you can, and that would obviously require additional capacity. But you can see that we've got essentially 3 virtual disks with about 400 gig of storage in total, and you can see just a rough breakdown there on the left-hand side of how that gets distributed across those 3 virtual disks. The Spectrum Protect Plus server does require either a static IP address or access to a DHCP environment in which it will be assigned an IP address. It does not matter from our perspective. It can be either, so whatever the customer needs or wants to run in their environment. You do want to make sure also that you have the latest VMware tools. If you're installing it in a VM environment, you want to make sure the latest VMware tools is installed. Right? It was tested against 9.1.0. However, if you've got the latest VMware tool set, you should be fine. So the first component I want to talk to you about within the Spectrum Protect Plus world essentially is these VADP proxies. The VADP proxies, as I mentioned, in a VMware environment, help to distribute the processing across multiple VADP proxies to take that load away from the Spectrum Protect Plus server itself. So those VADP proxies enable the load sharing and load balancing of those jobs in Linux environments, right? So you want to be aware of that. If proxies exist, the entire processing load is shifted, as I mentioned, off the Spectrum Protect Plus host and onto those proxies, right? It just makes everything more efficient and faster. The more proxies that you have, the faster the jobs will run, right? You can distribute those jobs across those multiple proxies. The system requirements for the VADP proxies themselves, it is either a SUSE or Red Hat kernel, 64-bit quad-core, 8 gigs of RAM, although we do recommend 16 gig, and you do need about 60 gig of disk space. And each proxy has to have a fully qualified domain name. The reason for that is you need to register those proxies with the Spectrum Protect Plus server in order for the Spectrum Protect Plus server to know that they exist and to distribute those jobs across the available proxies. Those proxies can be deployed in various sites, and you can essentially limit jobs to be running on VADP proxies that exist in only a particular site. The VSNAP storage appliance, this is the repository for where all of the Spectrum Protect Plus data is going to be written to. By default, when you install the Spectrum Protect Plus OVA or VHD, it does come with a single VSNAP storage appliance already built into it, and that's referred to as the VSNAP default, right? And you can see from the screenshot there, the only thing that you need to do when you install the Spectrum Protect Plus server is initialize that VSNAP storage appliance. That will essentially just prepare that disk and let the Spectrum Protect Plus software know that that VSNAP storage appliance is online and available as a target to write that data to. It serves, as I mentioned, as the primary destination for the snapshots of the data being written from the virtual environment that you're capturing with Spectrum Protect Plus. And you can add additional VSNAP servers in the environment either because of storage requirements. You want to just distribute the load across multiple VSNAP storage appliances, or because you have multiple sites and you want to deploy a VSNAP server in the multiple sites to allow that data to be written locally and still being managed by a single Spectrum Protect Plus server, regardless of where that Spectrum Protect Plus server is. So the VSNAP storage appliance is a ZFS storage management and file system. It has built-in compression and deduplication. We do recommend a gig of memory per terabyte of storage, right? The compression and deduplication, as I said, is built in. However, you do have the option within the Spectrum Protect Plus UI of whether you want to enable or disable either the compression and or the deduplication. That will depend largely on the workload as to whether or not there is any benefit to deduplication and compression for those particular VMs. As I mentioned, there are essentially three different configurations of vSNAP storage appliance. The first is the combined Spectrum Protect Plus appliance, right? That has the Spectrum Protect Plus software, the VADP proxy, and the vSNAP all combined into a single OVA or VHD. The storage for that is obviously a virtual appliance. So the storage is VMDKs, physical RDMs, and NFS VMFS storage. You can also add, as I mentioned, single additional vSNAP appliances, right, outside of the one Spectrum Protect Plus server you need to manage them. That can be a virtual installation, again, of just a standalone vSNAP OVA or VHD. And then finally, you can have a physical-based vSNAP storage appliance, right? And that would be an Intel-based CentOS server with block storage behind it, right? So that block storage is either DAS, iSCSI, or Fiber Channel, but it would be block storage. As I mentioned initially, the OVA that the VHD that the customer is going to deploy will contain all three components, and then over the course of time, they can add the individual components that they need while still maintaining just that single Spectrum Protect Plus server. Users and roles. The Spectrum Protect Plus environment leverages role-based access control for the distribution of the management of the appliance and for self-service by application owners and others within the environment. To enable a user to log into Spectrum Protect Plus, though, an admin does have to add that user to Spectrum Protect Plus and assign that user a particular role. If the LDAP authentication has been or LDAP integration has been enabled within Spectrum Protect Plus, then the user will be able to use their domain credentials or network credentials to log into Spectrum Protect Plus. Otherwise, the admin would need to create that user and a password to give to them to log into Spectrum Protect Plus itself. There are two roles that you can assign a user within Spectrum Protect Plus. The first is an administrator role. That administrator role essentially provides access to all of the resources and privileges, and there's no additional resource-specific privileges that you need to add to that user or assign to that user. If they are an administrator, they'll basically be able to do everything they need to within the Spectrum Protect Plus UI. They can create new users, they can edit and delete, change passwords, they can have access to all of the virtual resources that have been discovered and inventoried by Spectrum Protect Plus. However, you can create a user that has a VM administrator role. That VM administrator role only allows a user to register and modify hypervisor resources that have been assigned to them or delegated to them by an administrator, right? They have the ability to access those SLAs that have been assigned to them or delegated to them, again, by the administrator. And so this allows for the things like having your DBAs only have access to the database virtual machines and not the other virtual machines, right? So they are, or your, for example, your email administrator to only access the email virtual machines as opposed to any of the others. And this allows for them to be able to self-service, right? Go in and perform the tasks that they want, but only within the permission set that they've been granted within Spectrum Protect Plus. Those can be changed. Those roles can be changed at any time by the administrator, right? They can go in and change a user's role from VM administrator to administrator or change what resources that particular user has access to. Right? And the way that they go about doing that is using what we refer to this role-based access control, right? So the role-based access allows an administrator to set the resources and permissions that are available to the Protect Plus accounts, whatever accounts that have been created within Spectrum Protect Plus, right? Through this role-based access control, the users access only the features and resources that they need, right, and have been granted access to, right? This allows you as the administrator or one of the administrators of Spectrum Protect Plus to distribute that management appropriately across the resources in the environment that need them. Right? Users can be assigned hypervisors, right? So you can assign a particular user to just the VM hypervisor or just a Hyper-V hypervisor. And further, you can assign them only to particular hypervisors, right? If you have added multiple hypervisors, right, in a VM or Hyper-V environment, you can limit those hypervisors that a particular user has access to, therefore limiting the resources that they have, right, the VMs that they can access within Spectrum Protect Plus that are being protected on that hypervisor. The same is true for SLA policies. You can essentially limit or assign SLA policies to a user, meaning that they will only be able to modify or use those SLA policies while not having any access to the other SLA policies. The same is true of report resources, right? If you wanted to limit which reports a particular user could run or modify or access, then you can assign those permissions or privileges just to those reports. And we'll talk a little bit more when we get to the reporting section about the various kinds of reports that are available within Spectrum Protect Plus. Right? You're going to use either a button on the screen called User Access, or on certain screens you're going to use that icon that looks like a silhouette of a person, right, to assign the particular resources to that user. We can integrate Spectrum Protect Plus with an LDAP and SMTP environment as well. The reason we would associate it with an LDAP environment, right, is to allow users to essentially use their LDAP credentials to access Spectrum Protect Plus, right? The permissions and roles that you're assigning to that particular user still have to be done within Spectrum Protect Plus, but you can use LDAP from an authentication perspective to reduce the amount of overhead that the administrator would have within Spectrum Protect Plus in terms of having to create all of these various users and passwords. For SMTP, we're going to use the SMTP environment in order to schedule, or not schedule, but in order to facilitate the emailing of reports, right, so that you don't have to manually go in and run a report and then email it out to a distribution list. That can all be automated within Spectrum Protect Plus. All we need, obviously, are the network credentials in terms of IP address and name of the SMTP host, as well as an account that we can use in order to link the two, the Spectrum Protect Plus environment and the SMTP environment. SLAs, I mentioned this earlier, but SLAs are referred to within Spectrum Protect Plus, can also be referred to as policies. This is your service level agreements, right? This is how you translate the RPO and RTO requirements that the business has for the virtual environment protection and recovery into, the actual tasks that are going to be performed by the Spectrum Protect Plus server, right? So how often you want to snapshot a virtual machine, how long you want to retain those virtual machines, how whether or not you want that protection to be application aware or crash consistent, whether or not you want to index the file metadata for file level recovery, right? All of that is essentially defined within your SLAs, right? And you can see here from the screenshot that not only can you define the frequency and retention of those snapshots, but obviously whether or not you want to offload those snapshots to the Spectrum Protect environment. And we're going to spend a lot more time talking about that a little bit later in the presentation, but the offload creates essentially two backups of the data. One that resides within the VSNAP server, right, which is where Spectrum Protect Plus writes its data, right, for short-term retention, and then one on the Spectrum Protect server, which is used for that longer-term retention and archiving, right, which allows you to take advantage of the storage pools available within Spectrum Protect, including, object storage, cloud object storage, tape, all of the various pools and disk targets that are supported by Spectrum Protect. You can have multiple SLAs. As you can see here, the 3 default SLAs that are built. There's also a new SLA that was created by the administrator called tests. You can modify any of the existing SLAs, right? Change the settings within them. You can delete them. You can add new SLAs. Again, this is all going to be based on your business requirements for the virtual machines, right? Not all data is created equal, and therefore not all data needs the same level of protection and retention. If you want to have virtual machines associated with more than one SLA, you can, again. So You can assign a virtual machine to multiple SLAs. You can have just one SLA for all of your virtual machines. You can have as many SLAs as is necessary for the business requirements. You do have a number of options when you go to protect either Hyper-V or VMware virtual machines, right? You can decide whether or not you want to skip read-only data stores. If those data stores have been marked as read-only within the virtual application, you can determine whether or not you want SPP to essentially just ignore them, right? Just skip over them. You can choose whether or not you want to protect any temporary data stores. The temporary data stores are essentially coming from Spectrum Protect PLUS, and they are used when we restore or recover virtual machines. We are going to present temporary data stores on which the VMDK or data files are going to run off of. And so you can choose, if you have performed test restores where you've got these mounted data stores out there, you can choose whether or not you want Spectrum Protect PLUS to ignore them and skip over them, or whether you want them to be scanned and included within Spectrum Protect PLUS from a backup perspective. You can decide whether or not you want the file metadata on the particular virtual machine that you have selected to be indexed, right? If we are choosing to do that, that allows us then to perform a file level recovery, right, of the files that are stored within or written to that virtual machine. If you choose not to, that's fine. You can still perform the protection and recovery of the virtual machine. You just don't have the option of recovering the individual files contained within that virtual machine. You have the option whether or not you want to truncate SQL logs, right? That is, if you are protecting, for example, a SQL virtual machine, and you also want to, not only, in addition to creating a application consistent snap of that virtual machine, you want to truncate the SQL logs that are contained within it. You can choose whether or not that's a task that you want Spectrum Protect PLUS to take on as a part of the protection of that virtual machine. The number of retry attempts in terms of snapshotting the virtual machine that SPP will take, right? If for some reason we have a network connection issue, or there is a consolidation issue, for example, within the virtual machine or something like that, that does not allow us to snapshot the virtual machine cleanly the first time, this is essentially just a retry setting, right? The guest OS user info, this is necessary for a number of things. It's necessary if, for example, you want to do the file metadata indexing, right? We do need permissions to get into the virtual machine, essentially, in order to perform that metadata indexing. We would also need it for restores where you wanted to do things like re-IP the machine, things like that. So there are a variety of reasons that we would need the guest OS credentials there. If you are not planning on doing a re-IP of a machine when you do a restore, or you're not planning on re-index, file meta indexing, that sort of a thing, these can be left blank. However, for those various tasks, as I said, you may have to go back and provide that information. So let's talk a little bit about the backup, right? The process that's used for backup, what we do as part of that process in Spectrum Protect PLUS, et cetera. Right, so VMware backup. First of all, from a hierarchy perspective within your virtual environment, Spectrum Protect PLUS can back up the data at the data store, folder, subfolder, or VM level. What I mean is that you can choose that you want to protect all of the virtual machines, for example, on a data store, or within a folder, or within a subfolder, or you can pick just the individual virtual machines at the base level there that you want to protect. All the VMs, if you select, for example, to protect a particular data store or a folder or a subfolder, all of the VMs that are contained within that data store, folder, or subfolder are automatically protected, and any new VM that you add in the virtual environment to one of those data stores, folders, or subfolders would automatically then be added to be protected within Spectrum Protect PLUS based on the SLA that you've chosen for that data store, folder, or subfolder. So there's no need to go back and then add new VMs that you added to the virtual environment separately to Spectrum Protect PLUS, right? We will automatically inventory the folders, subfolders, and data stores, and any new VMs that you've added will automatically be included. If, however, you're protecting at the virtual machine level, right, not at a data store, folder, or subfolder level, then any new VMs that you add, you would need to inventory and add to Spectrum Protect PLUS SLA yourself. Backups are done at the block level and are run in a base once plus incremental forever model. What that means is the first snapshot that we take of a virtual machine or group of virtual machines will be a base backup, meaning we're going to copy all of the data from the virtual environment to the Spectrum Protect PLUS vSNAP storage appliance. Right, so if it's a 50 gig VM, then 50 gigs is going to get copied. However, every subsequent snapshot that we take or backup that we take is going to be an incremental, and we are going to leverage the change block tracking, the CBT file within VMware or the RCT file within Hyper-V in order to perform just that incremental forever snapshot moving forward. Keep in mind that each backup is a synthetic full, so regardless of whether you're looking to recover the initial backup or any of the subsequent backups, there's no need to recover the base and then add the incrementals or anything like that, right? So it's a synthetic full, meaning that no previous base or incremental backup is required for any restore. Essentially, we do the magic on the back end to essentially create a synthetic full that gives you full point-in-time recoveries for any of those snapshots. What's the workflow from within Spectrum Protect PLUS? So essentially, the first thing you're going to do is register a vCenter server with Protect PLUS, right? That gives us the capability of then going out and leveraging in VMware, for example, the vStorage API to not only discover all of the, or inventory all of the virtual machines that are associated with that particular vCenter, but obviously then use that vStorage API in order to quiesce and snapshot those virtual machines that you've associated with the SLAs, right? So we're going to register that virtual machine. We're going to inventory those virtual machines, right? Make them available within Spectrum Protect PLUS as resources to be protected. We're going to select the SLA, right, that we want to associate either with the data store, the folder, the subfolder, or the particular virtual machine, right? You can either select one of the predefined SLAs. We define a gold, silver, and bronze SLA, or you can create your own SLA and associate those resources with that particular SLA. You're going to select the appropriate backup options, right? Whether or not, for example, you want to truncate the SQL logs or whether you want to have the file metadata indexed, you know, that sort of a thing. Once you've selected those backup options, you go ahead and click backup, right? The Spectrum Protect PLUS is then going to determine the vSNAP server target for the snapshot data. Remember, like I said, initially you'll just have a single vSNAP appliance, so all the data will be written there. However, over time, you'll likely have additional vSNAP storage appliances in the environment, and Spectrum Protect PLUS will go ahead and determine which vSNAP storage appliance to write the data to. The way that we do that, or Spectrum Protect PLUS does that, is by essentially going out to the various vSNAP storage appliances and looking for the one that has the most available free capacity. It will then choose that one as the target for that snapshot and write the data to it. Right? The snapshot of the source VM or data store or whatever is then taken. Right? The protected VM data stores are determined, and we will then go and reach out to those various data stores to protect the VMDK files. If you have VMs that have distributed VMDKs, right, they are existing on multiple data stores, we'll then go out to each of those data stores to ensure that we are protecting the VMDK associated with that VM. The new target volumes, right, we are going to create new data stores essentially and temporarily mount them to the virtual environment, right, to the ESX or vCenter environment in order to then serve as the target for the write of the snapshot data from that virtual environment, right? We're then going, those data stores are created essentially on the vSNAP server and mounted to the virtual environment, right? We're then going to take the backup, right? We're going to copy that snapshot data to those mounted volumes or mounted data stores. Spectrum Protect PLUS is then going to it's then going to delete the temporary snapshots that we've created within the ESX or virtual environment. And we're going to snapshot the target data stores, those mounted data stores from the vSNAP storage appliance, right? We're going to snapshot that data and then unmount those data stores from the virtual environment. At that point, the Spectrum Protect catalog captures all of the details, right? The source, the vSNAP storage server that has been written to, the retention, the schedule, all of that various information is captured within the Spectrum Protect catalog database. For Hyper-V, it does not have as rich of an API integration as VMware does, so there are certain things that Spectrum Protect PLUS needs to have set prior to protecting a Hyper-V environment. The first thing that you need to do before trying to register any Hyper-V servers to Spectrum Protect PLUS is that you have to add all of the host information to the Spectrum Protect PLUS etc hosts file for those Hyper-V appliances, right? Whether you have just a single Hyper-V server or a clustered server, all of the Hyper-V servers that you want to add to Spectrum Protect PLUS have to have their information, their IP address and name, essentially added to the etc hosts file of the Spectrum Protect PLUS server. You have to add the Spectrum Protect PLUS service user, right, the user that's going to be accessing the Hyper-V environment, to the local administrators group on the Hyper-V servers, right? We essentially need local administrator access in order to perform the tasks necessary. So whatever account that you want to use and you are specifying within Spectrum Protect PLUS as the account to access the Hyper-V environment, that account has to be a part of the local server group, local administrators group. You're going to want to run a command on the Hyper-V server, and this command essentially is going to allow unencrypted to be set to true, right? We need this in order to be able to perform the tasks, again, of snapshotting and especially doing the file meta indexing for data that resides within those Hyper-V virtual machines. So you run that winrn command to set the allow unencrypted to be true. You can then verify that by running that follow-up command that will essentially just verify that that allow unencrypted is now set to true. And you want to make sure the port 5985 between the Spectrum Protect PLUS server and the Hyper-V server is open, and that is for that WinRM communication. Finally, you just want to make sure the iSCSI initiator is enabled on the Hyper-V server. This is what allows us to mount the data stores to take the snapshot and recover that data within the Hyper-V environment. So just some prereqs that you need to be aware of. For Hyper-V backups, the process essentially is the same, right? You're going to add the hypervisor and discover all of the virtual machines. Within Hyper-V, though, you can only protect either at the hypervisor or the VM level. There's no data store folder, subfolder sort of hierarchy within Hyper-V, and so we are going to allow you to essentially select the hypervisor, meaning you're going to protect all the virtual machines on the hypervisor, or individual virtual machines for to be added to an SLA and protected. Okay. The same model applies in the sense that if you select the hypervisor as the level at which you want to perform the backup, then any new VMs added to the Hyper-V hypervisor will automatically be protected by Spectrum Protect PLUS. And again, we're using that same block level base once plus incremental model in terms of the protection, right? So it's a block level protection that is using the initial base of full backup, and then every subsequent backup being just an incremental, in the case of Hyper-V, leveraging the RCT file. Again, each backup is a synthetic full, meaning that no previous base or incremental backup is required for restore. Same model as in VMware. What's the workflow? It's essentially exactly the same, except for step 8, instead of mounting the volumes to the ESXi, obviously in this case, we are going to mount them to the Hyper-V server or Hyper-V host via iSCSI. Right, but essentially everything else remains exactly the same in regards to the process, right? You're going to register the Hyper-V server, you're going to discover the virtual machines or inventory those virtual machines, you're going to select the SLA that you want to use to protect them. The VSNAP server is going to determine the target for the snapshot data, right? Which VSNAP server will be used to write the data to. We're going to take a snapshot of that virtual machine. We're going to create those new volumes and mount them to the Hyper-V environment in order to copy the snapshot data to them. We're then going to unmount them and snapshot that data to be stored within Spectrum Protect PLUS, and then finally update all of the various components within the Spectrum Protect PLUS catalog. So let's talk a little bit about file metadata indexing. One of the biggest features within Spectrum Protect PLUS is the ability to capture or all of the individual files contained within the virtual machines that you're protecting, whether they be VMware virtual machines or Hyper-V virtual machines, and give you a global catalog in which you can recover all of those files or any individual files either back to the original source virtual machine or any other virtual machine that you are protecting using Spectrum Protect PLUS. So there are some requirements for both Windows and Linux virtual machines. So to start with, you can only perform the file metadata indexing on Windows or Linux virtual machines, right? So from a Windows perspective, it does have to be Windows 2008 R2 or later. We cannot index the file metadata on 2003 or earlier. You can protect those virtual machines, however, you just can't do the file metadata indexing. Okay? We support NTFS, REFS, and CSVFS from a file system perspective. You do have to make sure that all the firewalls that exist between the virtual machine that you want to perform this file metadata indexing on and the Spectrum Protect PLUS server, right, has that port 5985 open, that WinRM port, so that we can perform those tasks that we need to through that channel. You do have to make sure that you've specified the user credentials within the backup options section of Spectrum Protect PLUS, right? And those credentials must include a user that has the logon as service rights permission, as well as a system login credential for the local administrator, right? So essentially you have to add them to the local administrator account and make sure they have the logon as service rights as part of that account. Otherwise, again, we will fail to be able to perform the file metadata indexing. As I mentioned earlier, you do want to make sure that the latest version of VMware Tools is installed on that guest OS so that we can use the tools within that to be able to perform the tasks that we need. From a Linux perspective, right, we support Red Hat 6.4 or greater and 7.0 or greater, as well as SUSE 12.0. So again, as long as the guest is running one of those operating systems, we can perform the file metadata indexing, assuming the file system is either ext2, 3, 4, or XFS from a file system perspective. Again, just like with Windows, we can snapshot the virtual machine for other file systems and other operating systems. However, we do need to have these requirements in order to perform the file metadata indexing. You have to have the SSH service running on port 22, and you have to allow access, obviously, from the SPP server through SSH to those hosts, right? So you need to make sure that all the appropriate firewall ports are open. The virtual machine does not need, the virtual machines do need to be running Python 2.6 or 2.7. And again, this is simply for the file metadata indexing. If you just want to snapshot the virtual machine, then you don't need to have Python installed, but we do need it for the file metadata indexing. And if you're running on LVM volumes, then you want to make sure that the LVM version is 2.0.2 or later. You want to make sure VMware Tools is installed as well. So where is the file metadata indexing data stored? Well, it's actually stored in two places. The metadata information is stored on the client temporarily, as well as the Spectrum Protect PLUS appliance, right? So on the client, the metadata collection starts after a successful snapshot of the virtual machine, and Spectrum Protect PLUS is going to create a text file for each drive or volume of that host, right? Once we've done that indexing, all of those text files are zipped up and sent to the Spectrum Protect PLUS server from the host. On Windows, those text files are stored in the C program data Spectrum Protect PLUS temp output directory, and in Linux, it's just stored in the temp directory. So the long and short of this is you do need to make sure that there is available capacity, although not a ton is needed. You do need to make sure there is some space available on the virtual machines to store this indexing data, at least temporarily. You can see the numbers there. You need about 7.7 kilobytes per file on the virtual machine itself to store the index, and then it's about 4 bytes after compression to Spectrum Protect PLUS, right? The metadata on the client is deleted after it's sent to Spectrum Protect PLUS, so it's not something that's going to grow over time, right? It's going to grow at the time of the snapshot job, get zipped up, compressed, and sent to the Spectrum Protect PLUS server, and once it's received on the Spectrum Protect PLUS server, it's then going to be deleted off of the client. It's no longer needed on the client. So on the Spectrum Protect PLUS server, when the zip files reach the VSNAP repository, they're going to get written to the data2 file catalog directory, from where the Lucene indexing is going to start. Once that Lucene indexing is complete, it's going to move the data to the data3/Lucene directory, right, where it's then going to be available for recovery, right? And I'll show you what that looks like from the UI as well. When the backup image associated with that file index is expired based on the settings that you have within the SLA chosen for that particular capture, then the file index data is also expired and removed off the system. So it follows the same retention pattern essentially as whatever the virtual machine snapshot has set for. So now that we've captured the data, right, it's both at the VM level and at the file system level, or file level, right, we've captured that data. Now we need to be able to recover that data or restore that data. And what does that mean from a Spectrum Protect PLUS UI perspective? So the first is, what are we doing when we do a restore, or how do we go about doing the restore? So the first thing that you're going to do is when you come into the Spectrum Protect PLUS UI, you're going to go to the navigation menu there on the left-hand side, and you're going to expand the hypervisor tab, and you're going to select whether or not you want to recover either a VM virtual machine or a Hyper-V virtual machine by selecting either Hyper-V or VMware. And then you're going to choose Restore. Right? When you choose Restore, it's going to bring up essentially all of the VMware environment. It's going to bring up all of the data stores, folders, subfolders, and virtual machines that you've protected. In a Hyper-V environment, it's going to bring up either just the hypervisor or all of the individual virtual machines you've protected, right? And then it's going to allow you to pick the particular point in time you want to recover. And again, the available point in time images that you'll see here are based entirely on the SLA associated with the protection of that virtual machine, specifically what the retention of those snapshots are, right? So, I can use the gold policy, which is going to take a snapshot once an hour and retain it for a week, or I could use the silver policy, which might take a snapshot once a day and retain it for a month. Whatever it is that I've set as my SLAs, that's going to determine the number of point-in-time images that I have from a recovery perspective available to me. I'm going to essentially select the point in time of the virtual machine that I want to protect, and then I'm going to use that little arrow icon to add it to the restore list. And if you look at the screenshot there, you can see in the upper right-hand corner that we are, in fact, in this case, performing the recovery of a full VM, right, the Linux 1 VM from November 6th, right? The image, the snapshot date was September 6th. And then from there, I've now selected, I can choose multiple images. In fact, if I wanted to mount the virtual machine as it existed on November 6th, November 4th, and November 3rd, if I have those images listed as available from a recovery perspective, I can add all of them. And Spectrum Protect PLUS will go ahead and perform a recovery of all 3 point-in-time images. I can then choose options, right? Options is then going to let me pick a variety of different things in terms of the restore, right? The first is it's going to allow me to choose where I want to perform the restore to, right? Do I want to restore it right back to the original ESX host or cluster in a VMware environment, or the original Hyper-V server in a Hyper-V environment, right? Or do I want to pick a different virtual environment in which to perform this restore. The only caveat here, obviously, is that you need to have discovered or added that virtual environment vCenter or Hyper-V server to Spectrum Protect PLUS. Otherwise, we don't know anything about it. So it does have to have been added as a resource within Spectrum Protect PLUS. Next, I have the restore type, and there are 3 different restore types. There's a test restore, a production restore, or a clone restore. We're going to talk about that in a moment. And then I have the network settings, right? Whether or not I want to allow the system to define the IP configuration, right? The virtual system, the target for where this is going, or whether I want to use the original IP configuration, right? So you have a number of options from a restore perspective to pick from in terms of, and again, this will all be driven essentially by the use case for your restore. Why are you restoring this virtual machine? Is it to install Microsoft's latest security patch to test it? Is it because you want to provide it to a reporting or analytics tool? Right? What the use case of that restore is going to drive the type of restore and the settings you choose from a network perspective. So as I mentioned, there are 3 types of restores that you can do. You have a test mode restore. What a test mode restore is going to do is it's going to create a temporary VM, and it's used for things like dev test, snapshot verification, installing a patch, and it's something that you would do likely on a scheduled, repeatable basis, and does not have any impact on your production environment. Right? You can use fenced-in networking to establish a safe environment so that it doesn't interfere with production at all from a resource perspective. And the VMs that are created through this test mode are given unique names and UUIDs so that they don't have, as I mentioned, any impact on your production environment, right? This is essentially just a mount of the VM out of Spectrum Protect PLUS and specifically the VSNAP storage appliance back to the virtual environment, right? It does not impact the currently production running VM that you are recovering. It has no impact. It's a separate VM. You have a clone mode restore. Clone mode essentially is just what you're familiar with in terms of cloning, right? It's going to create an exact copy of that virtual machine to the target that you specify, right? And this is for longer-term use cases, right? This is if you wanted to, for example, provide this VM to an auditor so that they could do whatever work that they needed to do, right, without, again, impacting your production environment. You, again, can recover those into a different environment, again, by choosing to allow the destination to set the networking. And, again, the VMs that are created through this clone mode recovery are given unique names and UIDs, and that is, again, so that they have no impact on the production VM of the same name. Finally, you have what's referred to as a production mode restore. The production mode restore is going to essentially overwrite the original VM with this point-in-time image that you have selected. So when you choose to do a production restore, you don't have a choice of where that restore is going to go to. It is only going to go back to the original source, overwrite the original VM with this point in time. And this gives you the capability of performing essentially disaster recovery locally if you're having a storage problem, or disaster recovery to a DR site if you so chose. Right? It's going to replace the original VM with the recovery image. All the configurations are carried over, including the name and the UUID, right, which is why if it didn't overwrite the original VM, there would be a conflict. In terms of managing jobs, you have an option when you choose the VM to be restored to manage jobs. And what the Manage Job tab or section allows you to do is essentially set a schedule to perform that test mode restore. So if you said, for example, that I want to make the latest snapshot of my SQL VM available to my development staff every Monday morning at 8 a.m. so they have the latest copy of our production environment in which to do their development work on, I can come into the Manage Jobs here and set the schedule, including obviously all of the location and networking and all that stuff, right? The Manage Jobs is simply just going to let you set the schedule for when you want that action to occur, right? So this eliminates the need for anybody to log into Spectrum Protect Plus and perform that manually. Essentially, those development engineers will simply arrive, they'll log into their environment, and they will see the latest version of that SQL VM available to them from a development perspective. Again, this is all going back to the tenets of how or why Spectrum Protect Plus was designed, and that is for self-service, right? To remove the need for the administrator, the IT administrator or the backup administrator, to be involved in everything that needs to happen. So what does a test mode restore workflow look like? What are the steps that we're taking essentially within Spectrum Protect Plus to make this happen? Well, the first thing is obviously what you as the administrator are going to do, or the schedule is going to do, right? It's going to pick the particular virtual machine, it's going to pick the particular point in time image, all of that, and that restore job is then going to get parsed for all of the objects that are necessary for that restore, right? The VMDKs, the file, whatever it is that's necessary for that restore is going to get parsed, and the Spectrum Protect Plus catalog data is going to get loaded to list all of those resources. We're going to create a volume clone of that backup image, right? The reason that we're going to create that volume clone is because we can't mess around with the original image that we've taken, right? We need that from a chain of custody perspective for retention purposes and compliance purposes. So we take a snapshot or a copy of that, or a clone of that backup image is created, and then we're going to use an NFS share to mount that back to the ESX environment, right? This is the test mode. We're not interfering with anything in the production environment, so we're going to use this backup image, right, that we're cloning onto this NFS share. We're going to create that temporary NFS data store from the volume clone, and then we're going to, the backup VMX file, or the information about the CPU and memory and all that stuff for the virtual machine, is copied and renamed. We're going to register the VM with the vCenter server. Remember that the VMDK, the data itself, is still running off of the VSNAP server, right? So we're not consuming any physical capacity in the VM environment. We are consuming all of that space within VSNAP. Okay? The VM is then registered and reconfigured based on whatever the parameters you've defined in the backup options are, right? And then that job kicks off, runs, and completes successfully. Once the job is completed, the job goes into Spectrum Protect Plus. Within Spectrum Protect Plus, the job goes into what's referred to as a resource active state, meaning that we have a mounted image essentially of this point in time out to the production or DR environment. And you essentially have three choices of what you can do with that mounted image, right? You can either clean it up, which is going to delete the VM, right, unregister it out of the vCenter environment. And then it's going to remove and delete those temporary data stores that we created. Or you can move it to production. If you move it to production, right, we're going to perform VMware is going to perform a vMotion, the VMDKs off the vSNAP storage appliance back to the VM environment. Or we can do the same when we create a clone. If we choose to clone it at that point, the VMware environment is going to use vMotion to clone those data stores to a target. We also have the capability of recovering at the VMDK level, so you don't need to recover the entire VM if you're looking for just one VMDK that you want to essentially attach to an existing virtual machine so that you could, again, search for a particular file or look for some piece of information, right? You can recover not at the VM level necessarily, but at the VMDK level. And essentially the process is exactly the same, right? You're going to go into the hypervisor, you're going to pick whether it's Hyper-V or VMware, you're going to click the Restore tab. In the Restore pane, you're going to select which hypervisor host to display the available VMs. You're going to select the VM, and if you click on the VM itself, it's then going to essentially show you all of the available VMDKs for that VM. You can expand any one of those VMDKs to show you the point-in-time images you have available from a recovery perspective for that VMDK. Select it, and again, use that little arrow icon to add it to your restore list. Finally, you have the capability of restoring at the file level. Now remember, you only have the capability of restoring at the file level if you have chosen to do a file metadata index of the contents of that particular VM. So when that file metadata index runs, and we went through the process essentially of how that works, right, you're going to then see a list of all of the available files that are available for recovery in the UI. If you go to that menu on the left-hand side, the navigation menu, and you choose File Restore, right, you can then search for a file. You can search by the file name, the file type, the VM on which that file would have resided. All of those filters are available for you to limit what you will see when you search, right? It is a metadata search, so it's not doing a full-text index search of the contents of any file. It is simply based on the file name and type, right? So you're going to use the filters to fine-tune your selection. You're going to select the particular file that you want to recover, and again, by expanding that file, you're going to see all of the point-in-time images of that file that you have from a recovery perspective. You're going to choose those point-in-time images you want to recover, and then you're going to choose whether or not you want to recover that file to a particular location, right, back to the original location or to a new location, right? From a visual perspective, keep in mind that this is essentially what it looks like, right? You've got the source VM where we're doing the file metadata indexing. That information is going to get sent to the VSNAP server, and from the VSNAP server, obviously, we're going to have all the available point-in-time images. We then choose that image to perform recovery of. One thing to keep in mind, if you are interested in doing the file level metadata indexing and restore, you do need to make sure that the enable UUID parameter is set to true on all the VMs that you want to perform the recovery to, and that's just to allow Spectrum Protect PLUS to know the volumes that correspond with the VMDKs essentially within the virtual environment. When you do the file restore, you do have a number of options that you can choose from, right? You can choose whether or not you want to overwrite the existing file or folder. You can choose whether or not you want to restore it to the original location or to an alternate location, and if you choose to restore to an alternate location, you can then go through your vCenter or your Hyper-V hierarchy and essentially choose where you want to restore that file to, including the path on the virtual machine that you want to restore the file to. Once you've set all this, you go ahead and click that restore, and that will initiate and kick off the job to restore that file. This is a global catalog. This is across all of the Hyper-V and VMware virtual machines that you have chosen to have file metadata indexing enabled for. So this is a very powerful feature and a differentiator between Spectrum Protect PLUS and a number of other virtual protection and recovery applications. So the offload to Spectrum Protect, right? Let's talk a little bit about what that means and the process that we're using in order to perform that offload. At this point, you're going to have essentially two environments. You're going to have a Spectrum Protect PLUS environment, and you're going to have a Spectrum Protect environment. Right? Spectrum Protect PLUS is going to seamlessly integrate with Spectrum Protect for long-term retention and archiving of backup images. There are some requirements on the Spectrum Protect side that you need to be aware of. The first is that Spectrum Protect has to be running version 8.1. The second thing to know is that the Spectrum Protect Virtual Edition, right, is included as part of the Spectrum Protect PLUS BOM at no additional charge. So if your customer is not already running Spectrum Protect for VE, they're running Spectrum Protect but not Spectrum Protect for VE, that will be included, if they so choose, with the Spectrum Protect PLUS so that they don't need to purchase that separately. So you've got, as I said, these two appliances. On the left-hand side, you see the Spectrum Protect PLUS environment and its components, right? You see on the far left is the hypervisor, obviously, where we're capturing the data. You have the Spectrum Protect PLUS appliance itself. You've got the VSNAP appliance and the VADP Proxies that are all essentially components of that Spectrum Protect PLUS environment. And then on the right-hand side, you've got the Spectrum Protect environment with the Spectrum Protect for VE, right? The data movers are really what is critical for Spectrum Protect Plus. It is what we are going to leverage in order to offload the data from Spectrum Protect Plus to Spectrum Protect. So when we do this offload, if we choose as part of the SLA that is protecting those virtual machines to offload to Spectrum Protect, we're essentially going to create an integration point between the Spectrum Protect Plus appliance and the Spectrum Protect environment. Right? The Spectrum Protect Plus is going to create the snapshot of the source VMs, whether they be the source VMware VMs, right? And then these snapshots are offloaded to Spectrum Protect for that long-term retention and archiving, right? So what's going on here? The Spectrum Protect offload, right? You can see from the arrows, the different colored arrows, the data flow, how this all flows together. So the VSNAP server, for any snapshot that you're taking within Spectrum Protect Plus, the VSNAP server is still the primary target for those snapshots, right? Those backups. They're going to be written to the Spectrum Protect Plus VSNAP storage appliance, right? The Spectrum Protect storage server is the target for the offloaded Spectrum Protect Plus images. Spectrum Protect Plus is what triggers the offload operation, right? It is not managed by Spectrum Protect. It's managed by Spectrum Protect Plus. And the Spectrum Protect Plus triggers that offload using the Spectrum Protect for VE data movers, those data movers from the SPVE configured nodes. Spectrum Protect Plus is going to record the offloaded backup in its catalog, right? So from a retention perspective, or from a recovery perspective, excuse me, when you want to perform the recovery of data that exists out on the Spectrum Protect environment that no longer exists on the Spectrum Protect Plus environment, you still manage that recovery through the Spectrum Protect Plus UI. There are actually two methods for offloading the data out of the Spectrum Protect Plus environment to the Spectrum Protect environment. The default method is going to perform the offload directly from the hypervisor, right? Essentially, we are going to call the necessary components on Spectrum Protect to reach out to the specified hypervisor and perform the capture of that snapshot data and offload it to the Spectrum Protect appliance directly from the hypervisor. This does support incremental backups, right? So that faithful incremental forever process still exists. Second method is to offload the data from the Spectrum Protect Plus environment to the Spectrum Protect environment, right? The offload happens from the VSNAP server directly to the Spectrum Protect server. In this scenario, incremental snapshots or incremental forever process is not supported. What we're going to do is within Spectrum Protect Plus, we're going to mount up a full copy of that VM and essentially call Spectrum Protect to copy that, right? So we don't have the capability of using that incremental forever. Basically, which method you use is going to depend on the environment that you're in, right? It's going to depend on the speed that you need to have that data, the impact in terms of resources and network in the production and hypervisor environments, as well as the storage needs. We will have some best practices around the offload method that you would use based on certain criteria. That is still being developed and worked on, but be assured that we will have that available. Some things to note. Right, the Spectrum Protect configuration requires a separate SP for VE server for every vCenter server. Right, that's still a requirement within Spectrum Protect, not within Spectrum Protect Plus. So you're going to need to install and configure as many SPVE servers as there are vCenter servers registered in Spectrum Protect Plus. Right, you're going to need to register those within your Spectrum Protect environment. You're going to want to create a one-to-one relationship between the vCenter servers and the Spectrum Protect servers when you're linking those. And during the offload operation, the Spectrum Protect for VE data movers will discover the correct vCenter and Spectrum Protect servers for the VMs to be offloaded. That's not something you have to manually set. That's something that Spectrum Protect for VE will handle automatically. One final note that's important here is that Spectrum Protect offload is not available for Hyper-V backups. So just know that this is currently only supported and available for VMware virtual machines. Maintenance, monitoring, and reporting, right? There are some things that you're going to want to do within your environment to ensure that it's healthy, make sure that it continues to run well, things that you want to do from a monitoring and reporting perspective as well. The first thing is that there's a maintenance job that runs automatically within Spectrum Protect Plus every evening. It's a system-defined job that gets created automatically when you deploy the Spectrum Protect Plus environment. It is automatically scheduled to run. You can start the job manually anytime you want. It is available if you go to that Actions button there that you see from the drop-down, choose Start. It will kick off that maintenance job. However, you cannot delete the maintenance job. There's no way to remove that from the system. It is necessary for the long-term health of the Spectrum Protect Plus appliance and environment, and so you don't need to run it manually. It will run automatically, but you can't remove it. And basically, it cleans up resources of removed SLA policies and jobs, and there's a maintenance task essentially that is performed for each job type. So snapshot, recovery, all of those things, right? And you can just see a snippet of the log there that shows what's happening when this job starts and what it's going to do. This is run right out of the Spectrum Protect Plus UI. And as I said, there's nothing really that you need to do. It'll run automatically. You also have the capability as an administrator of protecting the Spectrum Protect Plus catalog, right? If you go into the interface, the administrator console interface, which is available at the name of your Spectrum Protect Plus server, :8090, right? If you go in there, you're going to be taken into what's referred to as the administrative console. One of the tasks that you can do in the administrative console is to back up and or restore the catalog, the Spectrum Protect Plus catalog. There are a number of other things that you can do within that administrative console, including upgrading your Spectrum Protect Plus and stopping it and things like that. But for this purpose, the thing that you're going to want to be aware of is that periodically you're going to want to make sure that you take a backup of your Spectrum Protect Plus catalog. The initial release of Spectrum Protect Plus, this is a manual task that you're going to have to run. It is on the roadmap to be done automatically on a predefined basis, but for the initial release, this is something you want to make sure that you do manually on a regular basis. Monitoring jobs, right? Anytime you want to see a job or see what happened in a job, you wanted to look for failure messages or errors or anything like that. If you go into your standard Spectrum Protect Plus UI, if you go down on the left-hand side of that navigation page to System and you expand Job Monitoring, you'll see all of the various types of jobs. You'll see a job essentially for every SLA, and then you can expand those SLAs to see the individual jobs that have been run. And if you select any job, you can then expand that to show you the log file, right? This is to essentially show you everything that happened as part of that job, what Spectrum Protect Plus did in terms of that job, right? It reached out to the virtual environment, it did this, it did that. And you can see, obviously, if it succeeded, that's great. If it failed, you'll get all of the failure messages that you need to begin troubleshooting. And finally, Spectrum Protect Plus reporting. So the Spectrum Protect Plus provides a set of default reports that you can run or schedule and email automatically, right? These built-in reports are across several categories. We've got backup storage utilization, protection, the system itself, the VM environment, right? And if you expand any of those, you'll see all of the available reports that can be run for those various categories. The reporting feature, as I mentioned way back at the beginning of the presentation, is something that you can delineate using those role-based, right? So you can limit what a particular user, which reports a particular user can run and view, right? So if they only have access to particular VMs, for example, when they ran that VM environment report, they would only see those VMs that they have the privilege to see, right? So they won't see anything else. So that Role-based access control extends into the reporting module of Spectrum Protect Plus as well. As I mentioned, these reports can be run ad hoc, right, manually, or you can schedule them to be run at a particular point in time, and then leveraging the SMTP information be emailed out to individuals or email groups so that they can be kept up to date on protection or compliance or anything that is necessary for them to perform their tasks and job responsibilities. So I'm going to turn it back over to Sean Sperry now.
Thank you, John. I appreciate it. Great job.
Yeah, the only thing I wanted to mention, this is Dell. You can go to the IBM Marketplace right now, search for Spectrum Protect Plus, and download your 90-day free trial today.
And the documentation is also available. We'll publish that in the FAQ so that you can download the user guide and get some of the questions that you have answered about prerequisites and things along those lines. I think I'll wrap it up.